Ladies
Ooh.
and gentlemen, I am very happy that you joined the right screen today. Yeah, we have him here, the famous, the fabulous Alan Berkson, the man who loves to ask the right questions. And in his profile, Askers of Questions, I thought, wow, that makes a cool conversation, such as he is now the principal of the Intelligist group. I thought myself, well, Intelligist must be somebody intelligent and somebody smart. And he is a very clever one in asking questions at the right moment, in the right quality, in a friendly attitude, but can be a little teaser, I trust. Now, to explore this a bit in more detail, we welcome you and we welcome our guest, Alan Berkson. Alan, welcome to the floor. Please introduce yourself a bit. You have plenty of time to talk about yourself, such as where you come from, that you are living again in lovely New York, and that one in our quartet right now is honestly envying you a bit, as when he talks about Chicago, he has always a vision of some time where he got his favorite food, his favorite bagels. And it always tells you New York, New York.
So good they named it twice.
Yep.
Mm.
Just no blueberry bagels, okay?
No blueberry bagels. Well,
No
first, thanks for having me on the show,
abominations,
guys.
yeah.
I want to say congratulations. I think I saw that this is in the hundreds. I mean, how many shows have you done so far? This has been going on for a couple of years.
You are number 153.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Wow. No, but that's a lot of staying power. You guys have been doing a great job putting on the show on a weekly basis, having great conversations. I'm a big fan of great conversations. For those who don't know who I am, I've been in the tech space for many years. I consider myself one of the earliest digital natives. I started. I always, yeah. Hey Jeff, how are you doing? Jeff is one of the smartest guys I know about, particularly around storytelling. And we do a podcast together. We do a podcast together called The Cosmic Street Corner, and we should be bringing that back on pretty soon. I like to say there are very few people who older than me who started programming as young as I did. I was doing punch cards at the age of 13 in 1978.
Wow. It is really early.
And so I took a class at Hunter College in New York City. It was an adult ed class, but they let a kid like me in. The best part was one of my first programs I had to write was to calculate factorials. Bagels. Best bagels on 30. No, I can't remember where it is. Down actually not far from where Jeff spends a lot of time. I took a class at Hunter College, and I had to write a program called to calculate factorials. I hadn't even learned what that was in math, so I had to go ask my math teacher what a factorial was. And I still have the program. I have the two shade green IBM sheet that you put one character in each. I have the punch cards themselves. I bring them out every once in a while to show the kids, how we used to do it. And if you made a mistake or you had a bet, you had to like rewrite the deck. If you dropped your deck, by the way, you know what the trick was for if you had a really large deck?
Yeah,
you take a Sharpie and put a diagonal line across the side of the deck, and that way, if you had to put them back in the right order again, at least it gave you a. See, these are tips, kids. These are tips for how to do programming old school.
Back after when our infrastructure collapses and we go back to punch cards, this is a handy tip.
It
But
is. It is.
that's probably the day where those rotary phones come back into fashion as well, which our kids have a hard time operating.
And you now know very much, if you see these friendly old ladies when they do, I don't know the correct word in English, häkeln or stricken, then you know the expression. If you have these long needles, where they were talking about spaghetti code, such as when you have, I have to, in German, to strick, ich muss einen Code stricken. I have to program a code by clicker, then you would try to get one of your punch cards out of the system, which is in the wrong area. Yeah. And I learned that by heart from a chap which was, as I was coming from university, starting with Honeywell CDC Compagnie des Machines Bull, Honeywell Bull computers. And he told me in the museum, young man, I did programs on that Gamma 10. Trust me. Fantastic machine, but stupid operators.
My first job out of college, I have a computer science degree. I took a lot of programming language. It was actually as a VAX operator.
Yes.
I would. It was my job to manage the queues, and then stuff would go on the printer. And we had these full page at a time printers that made that sound as it was trying to print it out. I grabbed the printouts and put them in different, for people to come pick them up. So I have a very valuable skill as a VAX operator, which I intend to maybe use. I never learned COBOL, and actually that was one of my. I think that was a
big mistake.
I promised myself if I ever had to do, I never wanted to have to do a job that I had to program COBOL. I never learned COBOL.
They're in high demand.
Yeah.
I did COBOL, Pascal, C++, and some other stupid stuff like Pascal. But what is left? Trust me, if you would be as knowledgeable as you are in punch cards still today, you could get a lot of jobs in historical programs, such as Thomas is very well pinpointing on the fact and aspect. There are still programs on machines alive, which a lot of people thought they have stolen them from the Technology Museum in Munich or somewhere else where there are exhibits under normal circumstances, and they still operate and run. Yeah.
Well, look, I think that when it comes to programming languages, it's sort of like human languages. The more you know, the easier it is to learn new ones. But the one I think that threw me for a loop when I first learned it. Anybody ever program in Lisp?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time I really had to approach real-time programming. And the concepts from Lisp are still being used in a lot of the code and a lot of the architectures that we have today.
Yeah.
But that was probably the hardest one for me to figure out.
By the way, I just checked COBOL. It may be in demand, but ChatGPT can do it as well.
Well, then we have sorted that challenge as well. And we love the audience to engage in throwing in some remarks, comments, and questions as I jump in with that, what drove me around. Aside, we have now 1 point in your career.
Yeah, we covered the past.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about
the thing is, the programming skills is that, and something made you found the Intelligence Group. What?
Well, it's actually related to the gentleman who's been chatting on LinkedIn, Jeff Gomez. Jeff and I went to Queens College together many years ago, and Jeff is a preeminent storyteller and a world-renowned expert in multi-channel, multi-platform transmedia storytelling. He's worked with some of the largest franchises in the world, and from an entertainment point of view, Pirates of the Caribbean, Men in Black, Avatar, Spider-Man. He also worked on Halo with Microsoft. He worked on, and about a decade ago, maybe I guess 2011, 2012, I had this idea that corporations were very poor at telling stories, and could I apply? Yeah, Jeff's modest.
Hey, Jeff.
Could I apply some of the same techniques that Jeff and his team at Starlight Runner were doing for big entertainment franchises? Is there an application for businesses? And I came up with some concepts which I called corporate narrative. I know that you're on another show. Brent and Paul make fun of me all the time for the corporate narrative. But at the same time, I think I feel pretty proud of it, because while it was a little bit ahead of its time, we're at a point now where I think we have the technology and the capabilities to make it work. It's a challenge with being, as a company, how do you tell a story? It's not just one person. You've got marketing, sales, product. You've got partners. You've got customers. There's a lot of people who are part of that ecosystem of storytelling, and how do you bring it all together?
Right.
So
and how do you tell it honestly,
authentically?
Yeah, authentic.
Yeah.
Wait. Honesty is not valued.
I think honesty is a misplaced word, in the sense that it assumes that there's something that's true or false or right or wrong. Authentic is, I believe what we have this light of, or the center of what we want to talk about. That's a guiding principle for our brand, and as long as we stay true to it, that's being authentic. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say things that may not be right. Brands, we see it all the time. Brand mistakes. It's almost they become memes very quickly. And how do you deal with that? And if you build a strong corporate narrative, you're in a position to weather that and actually come out strong on the other side.
Yeah, but let's dig a little to the differentiation, because I'm a bit surprised. After all, honesty is something that helps also with staying authentic, isn't it?
I agree. I just don't, but I don't want to get caught up in semantics of. I'm not saying don't be honest. I'm just saying that you could be honest but not authentic, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
And so being true to what your brand is trying to say or trying to do, and I call it conducting the orchestra. You've got different. Everybody's got. If you're thinking about an orchestra, you've got drums and violins and tubas and trombones and clarinets, and they're each playing different notes. They're each playing different. Parts of the song. Maybe it's a harmony, maybe it's a counterpoint, maybe it's a rhythm. But if they're not playing in the same key, if they're not playing at the same tempo, you get dissonance, and you see that a lot, and that's confusing for the audience. It's confusing for customers. It's confusing even for employees to understand what it is that you're doing. I see a lot of. There's a difference between a campaign and a corporate narrative. A campaign is something that an agency puts together to try to get somebody's attention. But if you string a bunch of different campaigns, well, what does the brand really stand for? They're just trying to do a gimmick, or very often it's just a gimmick to try to get attention. But if there's a corporate narrative, there's an underlying story world that they're aligned to along the way. Each piece of that, it's like a puzzle piece. I mean, are you Marvel Cinematic Universe fans? And yes, each. Why is the Marvel Cinematic Universe so successful, and why is the DC Cinematic Universe crap? It's because
the DC Cinematic Universe.
DC is Batman and Superman and and Wonder Woman. It's because the person who's running the Marvel Cinematic Universe is making sure everybody stays true to the story world and stays true to the brand. And you get different pieces of the story in different movies or different television shows or animated features or video games, whatever, but it's all telling the same unified and concise story. With brands, most brands don't do that well. There's some consumer brands who do it better than others, B2B brands.
Why don't they do that well? Is that because all of a sudden they all need to have an overarching purpose that is beyond business, like making this planet a better place?
Well, you're not wrong, Thomas. I think that it has to do with you have to know what do you have to give to the world. Every business has something. I mean, and you could be a mom and pop grocery store, and your job is to serve the community, making sure you have the foods and other grocery items that the people in your neighborhood need. Right? That's your purpose, and that's what you have. But if it's just to make money, which is a challenge for many companies, particularly public companies, who are faced with quarterly grillings by analysts and the market, it makes it much harder to tell that story. Brands that are able to look beyond that quarterly earnings and quarterly review, I think have a better shot at staying power and being successful, particularly in a pervasive communications world that we live in.
I absolutely embrace that statement. It is the perspective that you have a larger plate you observe, and that you have still a more and longer perspective than the distance from your finger to your nose. I can't get mad on these 3 months cycle driven nerds. Maniacs, you can call them what you want, but they are not my normalos I would like to work with and to do my services for.
Define
I
normal.
think
Define normal.
Yeah, define normal. I'm unique, so I can't be normal. But aside of that, I found 3 other folks which are unique as well, which are on the screen right now. And from the founding of the Intelligence Group was what I was questioning myself is, what was your motivation to found it together with Jeff and others?
So this goes back to
college.
Well, it goes back. I'm going to say there's when I have twin girls who are about to graduate college, but when they started kindergarten, I put a sign up in our kitchen, and it was just a little handwritten note, and the sign said, "Did you ask any good questions today?" So when they come home from school, I'd want to hear about their day, but it was always important to me that it's a critical thinking skill. What is a good question? A good question is, we've all been in a class where some kid raised their hand and asked a question that they're trying to either show off to the teacher or show off what they know or get attention. That's not a good question. A good question is showing that you understand the subject matter and the topic, and that you're asking a question to move the conversation forward. And I wanted my girls to think about being able to process what they were doing, and then can I take the conversation forward? That's a critical thinking skill. I didn't realize how valuable that would be as we move into the AI and GPT arena. But so when I started the Intelligence Group, it was trying to, a lot of times in a business has what I would call undiscovered assets, something that they have within it. It could be IP, it could be processes, it could be physical plant, it could be something. And we'd help businesses basically find ways to grow by leveraging some of these things that just, you're in business for a long time, you forget, and you get very focused on trying to either, pay your bills or service delivery, and it's hard to think outside the box. So then we would go in and come in and try to see if we can ask some good questions and help them, grow. Part of that was how I got the attention of Freshworks.
Mm-hmm.
I had written a blog post for a, you guys, John Farrar and Nimble. Nimble had a blog, and I wrote a blog called, it was about my pancake recipe. I love to make pancakes. But the point of it was, a lot of times people don't know what business they're in. And we were talking before about, before we got on about one of my favorite essays, which was Marketing Myopia by Theodore Levitt. He wrote it for Harvard Business Review probably 60 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But the fundamental premise of the essay is most companies don't know what business they're in. And we see this all the time. You're not in the business of making software. You're in the business of helping companies do customer service, right? And that's a fundamental difference in terms of how you look at it.
Absolutely.
And so, knowing what you're good at and being able to focus on it and being able to express it, and that was essentially the focus of my pancake essay. And in fact, when I interviewed for Freshworks, it was Fresh Desk at the time, the CEO actually quoted that blog post back to me. He had done his homework, and he actually quoted that blog post back to me. He says, "So I want you to help me figure out what our pancakes are." So
very much.
Someone knows the blog.
There you go, Jeff.
You have with music playing together, that your daughters are in music as well. Yeah. I
missed the beginning of that question, Ralph. You were hung.
You froze.
Yeah, that was that. Okay. Put the tape back on the starting point. I observed that orchestration and your example with music and orchestras, for me, has a relation to your daughters and their stuff they do in music, performing, and all that. And that you are not only a proud father, but also a big fan of shows, music, and performances. And there you have this nicely liaising of, if the music is playing in the right team approach, then you have something fantastic. Else why you get those dissonances?
Well, one of my favorite analogies when it comes to that point of view is thinking about jazz. Actually, I think I wrote a blog post about this one time. Improvisation. Sometimes people will watch jazz and just have no idea what's going on, just because it sounds like noise or it sounds like dissonance. But it's an organic process that these musicians are connected to each other. They're listening, they're reacting, they're and creating on the fly in a way that they're aligned with each other. So there's an agreement on what the theme is, and then they're going to play around that theme. Again, that goes back to the same type of thing with corporate narrative. I talk about, you want your teams to be able to improvise. You don't want to, if you give them strict instructions, it's really hard to do a top-down management from that point of view, because then you're stifling creativity. You can probably have unhappy employees. So you need to give them the ability to improvise, but giving them that foundation of what, here's our corporate narrative and here's how we need to align. You can improvise around that and find themes within that. You can even go off on a tangent as long as you bring it back in the end.
Yeah, they're not playing off the sheet music.
there is no more sheet music, right? I mean, we're every day there's a new twist. A while back, I was on a panel for The Economist at a social media week in New York, and it was about, and this was probably maybe 2016, 2017, and it was about what is the impact of AI, and this is back then, on different areas. And there was somebody talking about entertainment, and I was there. I was talking about customer service, and and what it does is it changes the skills that you need to have to be successful in a role. The idea that I had is, or the premise that I presented was, if something happened once and we have an answer for it, automation can handle that question every other time afterwards. That's the idea, is that if we can identify the problem space, and then we have a solution for it, we can apply it. Automation, AI, whatever you want to call it. Esteban calls, he's going to yell at me for saying AI, but I'll call it automated intelligence instead of artificial intelligence. So what is the role of humans from that perspective? And the role of humans is, if something has never happened before, that's where you need a human to sit there and say, can I assess it? Can I use some critical thinking? Can I use some empathy to have the conversation with whoever's on the other side? Can I then use critical thinking to come up with a new solution or a way? But again, I need to, that's part of that jazz. I need to be able to improvise. I need to be empowered to do that.
Isn't that also the role of machine learning?
Yeah, the fuzzy area around.
There hasn't been, there is a situation that hasn't been there before, like in traffic, autonomous cars. So basically each situation is kind of unique, and still the car needs to be able to cope with it, or take medicine, diagnosis.
Oh, it's unique, but still similar. Yeah, it's not a completely new situation.
So I used to do a show with my buddy Jonathan Yarmus, aka Dr. Disruptive. He called it Pardon My Disruption, and we talked about autonomous cars and how it's closer than we think and further away than we think. It's much harder. It's a much harder problem to solve. And so what we see with machine learning is it's getting better in terms of being able to, but in the end, it's doing the same thing we're doing in our heads, but we do it much better, which is we see a situation, it looks familiar, and then we can react to it based on our knowledge and our experience, but we're just much better at, it's the old joke that AI has trouble differentiating between a blueberry muffin and a chihuahua, right? Have you ever seen that picture? They show a picture of a muffin and a chihuahua, but it could, because it's not doing it based on the same type of logic that we have and the same way we think about it. It's doing about pattern matching, and it's still really hard. And I'm not, we're not close to fully autonomous driving for quite some time. That's my take.
But we come to the point that foreseeing future and having the nose at the right point and take up the smell of future developments seems to be something where you are pretty good at. Your daughters were still either in college or approaching university when in 2015 you had that TED Talk, which was driving on a topic which is as up to date as it could be. What are the skills one would need when he is now going back into work after he had some time off? He is looking for a new job, or just from the perspective going to school, what do I teach the kids, or as a lecturer in university, for the right things to achieve in life?
That's a great question, Ralph. And I'm not saying that just to stall for time. But I like it because it's actually something that I've been thinking a lot about. Recently with ChatGPT, I've seen a lot of I pay attention to the ed tech and education,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of people, complaining. Oh, how do I tell if a student used ChatGPT to write an essay? And and the challenge we have is our educational system is just so dated. They're using punch cards and the equivalent of punch cards. We have a system where we're teaching people how to memorize things and then regurgitate them.
Mhm.
I was frustrated by the fact that probably until my girls were probably in 7th or 8th grade, they were never given something to read and then report on that they didn't have to assume was true.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So they weren't learning how to vet. So my response to people or educators who are saying Chat GPT is messing up my classroom, it's then you're not asking the right questions. What are you trying to test for? Are you trying to test for the ability to regurgitate, or are you trying to test for creativity and critical thinking?
Yeah.
And even collaboration. I've
Which is
written
an important
essays on.
skill, yeah.
You look, group projects. If you have kids or you've been a kid, you've done a group project in school,
Definitely.
and they always suck. Group projects suck
Because no one does the group project. You got the one person.
Right. You get 4 people. One person does nothing. One person, brings cookies, and then 1 or 2 people do most of the work. But the challenge is that nobody ever teaches them how to do it. I always got frustrated when they said, "Here's a group project." No, teach them how to do it. That's a skill. Teach them how to collaborate. Teach them how to work together. Teach them how to delegate within a autonomous group as opposed to a leader group, to delegate a task and then work together and figure out how to solve a problem. That's a good skill.
Absolutely.
That's a skill that computers can't do right now.
And that is something humans would do. Sorry, Marsha, for interrupting.
No,
but I'm wholeheartedly driven with your girls on university, my boys in university. Still 2 of them are, and the 3 of them were ISEC members. I call it always ISEC. Yeah, ISEC. That's the International Students Organization. There, they learned how to work together, learn there for their periods in life in a short term and short time, a lot more than in their real education and studies in the university. And I was overwhelmed to see that these fellow students from international environment, all people from all over the world, came together in a worldwide conference, for instance, and did a lot of group work. And these tribes, they cooperated in a way that you were educated. Okay, if you would like to go for that one, then go for this one and that one and that one, and that would be your next step. So they definitely did what you asked for, such as I educate you how to do a proper working together exercise. Yeah.
Look, so both of my kids are studying the arts, musical theater, but they didn't really have a lot of arts education growing up. The focus is always on STEM, and I'm not saying don't teach STEM, but I would love to see a class on improv as part of your elementary school education. Improv, the fundamental premise of improv is yes and. Right? You say something, I don't say no, I say yes, and but it requires me to listen.
Yeah.
It requires me to process and be aware of everything that's going on. And then it requires me to then be able to communicate. So, Ralph, to get back to the original question you asked is what should you be learning? You should be learning listening skills. You should be learning critical thinking skills. You should be learning creativity, collaboration. These are all things that right now, they say that you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by a person who knows how to use AI well in terms of a career. So you think about prompts. They're saying you should get good at prompts. GPT prompts and being able to. Well, what is that? That's just asking good questions.
Right. It's a different format for doing an old skill.
Isn't that a reformatted way of asking good questions? Because doing a Google search is basically asking questions as well. You won't find the right links, admittedly, to answers if you are not prompting the system well.
It's funny you say Google because so getting back to the TED Talk, Ralph, I had 3 skills that I identified. One was to vet, which is to tell if something is true.
Yeah.
And understanding that what a primary source is and what a secondary source is, and understanding what an opinion is versus what is what's data. The second skill I talked about I called it synthesis, which is the ability to rapidly consume information and then be able to apply it. I told the story a bunch of times. One day I came home and my daughter was sitting in front of YouTube watching somebody teach her how to play Taylor Swift's song on guitar. So the ability to say, I need to learn something or I want to understand something and then go find it and then do it. That's to me, that's synthesis. My third skill was curation, which is sharing a piece of your understanding with the world. I always complain if somebody shares a link to an article on LinkedIn, don't just share the link. Tell me what you think is important about it. Why should I pay attention? That's the value for me. I already trust you. We're connected on LinkedIn. That's why, because I think you're smarter. I think you bring value to me, to me from a network point of view. Just curate it. But in conversations since then, there's a fourth skill which I would add today, and it's what you just said, Thomas. It's search. If you sit me down in front of Google to search for something, and you sit somebody else, we're going to come up with something different, even though we're trying to find the same answer. Some people, because you can't just put in a random things into a query. The more specific you are and the better you are at search, the better your answer is going to be. So I guess that's, again, part of asking good questions.
Yes, to me, it's just another way of asking the question. I mean, if I go via a catalog system, like good old Yahoo, as it was in the beginning, it's again, or a phone book, right? It's again asking the right question, just in another way.
Yeah, but don't we have to learn that new way to ask questions?
Yeah.
I know that for myself, I've only recently started doing searches in complete sentences. My old habit is to use keywords and use those to put together something that makes sense to me and see what comes from that search and put it together myself.
Are you using Boolean?
No, I'm not that clever.
This and that, but not this.
You know what? I think you made me think, Marshall, because I don't do search in full sentences. I still do more of a keyword loaded search.
Yeah. And it works. But that leaves me wondering, we have been moving towards natural language processing to work with AI. And the goal has always seemed to be the Star Trek enterprise computer, where you ask it to do something, it does the thing. And we've had Alexa and we've had Siri, but we've got generations and generations of people who are trained to do their input with keywords on a keyboard. How do we get from the one to the other? Do we get from one to the other?
Hey, look, what do they say? It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks.
Woof, woof, baby.
I think as with most things, necessity is a great driver. I think that there's a difference between want and need. I think a lot of people want to understand how to do it, but if you don't really need to, it's not as big a motivation. I say this all the time. It's like, I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to program. Well, that's nice. But it most likely won't happen until you need to do it, and that's a differentiator.
Yeah. Isn't there also a differentiation between the input metaphor? I mean, if I'm sitting in front of a keyboard, I punch in as little characters as I can, because my typing is first slower and second quite error prone. In times of conversations or conversational user interfaces, I probably just do the same with the machine as I do with any other person. Just ask the question as it comes.
I think that in the you have to trust that that's going to work. My frustration with audio interfaces is just that it doesn't. Maybe I speak too quickly. Maybe it's my New York accent, but it doesn't get it right very often.
Mhm.
I try to do it into my phone instead of texting because I don't want to sit there and type. But I end up spending more time going back and correcting. So
Mhm.
as the NLP improves, or as the speech to text improves, I think that makes it more likely that I would use it. It also depends on what interface I have as an alternative, which is on my phone.
Mhm.
It's tougher to type, but I very rarely do speech to text when I'm sitting on my laptop, for instance, which I could. I have a Mac and I can use Siri on my Mac just like I use Siri on my phone, but I don't.
Right. And some of this is part of the social contract too. If you're sitting in Starbucks with your laptop, using text to, or speech to text is at the very least a social faux pas. At the most, it's disturbing the peace and you get kicked out.
Yeah, except you have people on the phone in Starbucks, and that's annoying.
Yeah, it's pretty much.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep on expecting the best of people.
But I'd flip it around and say that there's so much noise that the accuracy or the it probably isn't as accurate because of the background noise and stuff like that. No, look, Thomas, you said it well. It's how much time do I have to spend doing it? I type really well. I've been typing on to communicate for so long. When I was in college, I don't know if anybody remembers BitNet, but if you couldn't type quickly, you weren't having a good conversation with anybody because they'd get bored and move on. So typing to me is easy on a keyboard, less easy on my phone or some other device like that.
Well, the keyboard is slightly bigger. Yeah. It's better to apply 10 fingers as opposed to 2 big thumbs.
You made the aspect very vividly. There are necessities and there are some drivers. And you were one who was talking in our first analyst summit virtually, who was talking about the Corona kids, such as those people. And in these times, one has to change thinking, acting, working, and a lot of standardized rituals, procedures, and processes were dramatically changed. Seeing back to the Perspective 2015 TED Talk, what you need in the future, what was developing, and did some of the needs you had to deliver on through the pandemic being part of that, or what is coming on top of this?
Let me see if I understand what the question. The pandemic. So the pandemic created some challenges for how people worked and communicated. Rather than going in an office, you had to have Zoom calls. It took a big hit on serendipity because you didn't walk into somebody in the hallway, or you couldn't just turn to the person to one side of you and say, "Hey." So you had to be more intentional. And I think we over-indexed on scheduling. Your calendars became very important, and not that they weren't important before, but basically I would have an entire days full of Zoom calls with no space in between. That's not what it was like pre-pandemic. And so one of the reasons is we didn't, the only if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem is a nail, right? That's the adage. So if the only tool you have is a Zoom call, then every problem is something that needs to be solved by a Zoom call, and that's clearly not the case. So I think we over-indexed on this having calls and how do we communicate. There was I did some work with my buddy Mike Frietta, who's one of the most amazing minds when it comes to community I've ever worked with. And one of the concepts that we talked about was working out loud. Not new. We didn't create it, but instead of being in a position where the only way I can communicate or get information is either by writing a report or having a one-to-one conversation, finding opportunities where I can let people find what it is that I'm working on. Going back to the search as a skill. There was a group I worked with at Freshworks, and it was a company that Freshworks acquired. And when they started working, they didn't use email at all.
Oh,
they did all of their communications in at the time Fresh was using Workplace, Facebook's business version of Facebook. And for me, who was several thousand miles away in New York while they were in India, it gave me the ability, I could see everything that was going on. They had their product, all the product strategy, their customer call, whatever. It's all worked out. It was all out loud. I'm not saying that there aren't challenges with that. Obviously, there's confidentiality and security and other stuff, but it was a different way of thinking about how do you communicate. So instead of saying, in order for you have to give me a report once a week, I didn't need a report. I could just go look at and see what's happening with the conversations. I could search. I can find stuff, and so those types. I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of that. Post-pandemic, in terms of just people figuring out how to do that. I mean, there's collaboration built into tools, but when they say collaboration, it really just means chat, and that's not collaboration.
Alan, that's easy. So the cynic in me says what you did is a pull, whereas everybody in management position prefers the push. Here it is on a silver platter.
Right.
You do the work for me, so that's easy.
Right, but now you take automation or you take automated intelligence, put it into it, and now you can have that go and give you a summary of what's happening within everybody's working out loud. Create the summary.
Yeah,
we have the technology to do that. So it goes back to the same thing as in school. If you're asking somebody to write a report, read something and write a report on it. Yeah, that's a skill that GPT can do. And now, if you want to read something and then say, take it to the next step, or try to create something, from there, or what, that's a skill that we need to develop. GPT can do a summary.
Yeah, and it's highly important to do so, because what's the usual reaction pattern? Things go messy. Your manager asks for a daily report instead of a weekly. So what's the consequence? People spend more time on reporting instead of solving the issue.
Yeah.
So yes, the machine needs to do this stuff.
Yeah, I want hourly reports on why you're behind schedule.
Yeah. Line item 1, hourly report takes half an hour.
That is one of the aspects why I'm so fed up when it comes to startup companies or young companies which would like to go on their ideas, and they then have to collect some money, and how to communicate properly to those who might have the money, that they understand that that is something extremely unique, sexy, and worth investing and help to grow. What is your observation on what you should communicate when you have done the 3 core skills you observed in your TED Talk: the VET, the synthesis, and the curation, synthesis, and the curation. And I added already in the cheat sheet search. Yeah,
Search.
so we have 4 cool skills. Yeah.
I think that the answer is Marketing Myopia by Theodore Levitt.
Okay.
And it's
That
what
was a
business
quick
are you in? I think it has to do with understanding what business you're in. One of the challenges I see with a lot of startups is they get excited about either technology or a specific use case, but they don't tie it well to business outcomes, or or they are creating. One of my favorite things is somebody says, "Oh, I'm creating a new category." I say, "That's great." So in this new category, who has do people know how to buy your product in this new category? Do they have a budget already for this new category? Do they have to move budget? Oh no, they're just going to love it because it's going to make their life easier. It's like, okay, you see that.
Well,
but that comes back to
we hear exactly that.
I'm a very conservative person on that one, such as if I would love to sell you something I have in my mind and I think it's valuable, what's in for you would be my attitude and my question, and to explain to you in my conversation and communication why you would have a benefit in using my service, or where it brings you faster forward than with others. Yeah?
I'm going to challenge you on that one, Ralph.
I'm afraid so.
One of my mentors, Mike Ross, he was a salesman for many, many years. And he's fond of saying he'd walk into a prospect's office, and the prospect would say, "So, how can you help me?" And Mike's response was, "I don't know yet."
And I need the discovery code.
And I don't even know if I can, but let's talk about it.
So it's honest.
So trying to sell somebody, thinking you understand their problem without having done the discovery and without having had the conversation is you're handicapping yourself. You're making it more difficult. So, that's the challenge I think a lot of startups face, is that, look, you're an entrepreneur, you're really smart, and you came up with what you think is a way to solve a lot of people's problems, and there's a good likelihood that you can, but that doesn't mean that it's a out of the box one size fits all solution, or there's an education process that has to happen. Early on at Freshworks, we had a product called MobiHelp. MobiHelp was an SDK for adding customer service chatbots to your apps. This was like 2015, 2016. It was very early on, and this was a case of creating a new category. And do you agree that it would be great to be able to have customer service embedded in your app? Sure. How do you buy that? Who buys it? Whose budget is that? A customer service budget? Is that a development budget? Is that where does that fit in? And so it took a bunch of years for the market to figure out where that fit in, who would own it on the customer side, and how to make it successful and how to implement it.
And here we are again in asking the right question. With the discovery, such as you stumble into your prospect, and if you have that starting point with, I don't know yet how I can help you, but let's talk about, let's have some coffee, beer, tea, and talk about what's happening in your daily life and where are your pain points, and are some of these pain points I understand, and I have not even me, but I know somebody who could help you on that. And chuck, in that moment, the fish and the guy with the fishing rod come together.
Speaking of fishing rods, it makes me think of I did trade shows for Freshworks early on. I did them in North America, and we'd bring in an SE, and I don't want to make anybody feel bad. We'd bring in an SE from India, and they hadn't really talked to people that much in person. And the first day of the trade show, you'd walk up to the booth and they say, "Hey, can I show you Freshdesk?" And you'd look and say, "No, thanks," and move on. By the last day, you'd walk up and say, "Hey, how you doing? How's the show for you so far?
Yeah.
What have you seen that's interesting? What did what you come here to anything here? What you come here to look for?" And they ask you, "Oh, so what is Freshdesk?"
Yeah.
And then you say, "Well, we can talk about that in a minute, but build the conversation."
First, your talk. First, how are you feeling? Where are your roses? Where are your thorns? What have you found marvelous? I just love it. Yeah.
And it was great to see the light go off in the SE's head, saying, "Okay, I get this. I get that. It's not just leading with product. It's the first thing to do is understand. The hardest thing when you're trying to sell something is to say to the person, "You don't need what I bought, what I'm selling."
Yeah. But from that point on, you are known as a trusted advisor. You are not overselling. You're authentic. Chung.
I don't have one of my signs. I don't have a thumbs up sign.
You're not necessarily authentic, but you're honest. If you're saying, "Well, you got a problem that's not matching my solution."
Why isn't that authentic?
It's not. I said it's not necessarily authentic. It's in any case honest.
And here we have that loop again,
And
honesty and authenticity.
The authenticity comes with the delivery, right? I mean,
does it along? Look, it's what Ralph said. It's am I a trusted advisor, or am I just trying to sell you something?
Yeah.
And it is very fascinating to see with these added fourth one, with these 4 skills you were mentioning more or less in 2015 or coming up to 2023, what is so useful and so beneficial, and then utilize today's technology to drive this forward. And we have touched ZU and ChatGPT or GPT optimization and opportunities. And if I understand you right, and I would like you to have in the last minutes of our hour an observation going forward where you see the skill in how does one learn to ask the right questions for the machine.
I think it's the same way you get to Carnegie Hall. Marshall?
Practice.
Thank you very much. But I have no clue being in Germany here.
Carnegie Hall is a well-known venue for elite musicians to play, and there's a joke about a guy walking down the street and he asks somebody, "How do you get to Carnegie Hall?" And the response is, "Practice, practice, practice."
Thank you very much.
Well, look, I think it goes back to being willing to fail and take chances and embrace something new. I taught an adult ed class in computers when I was in college, and it was using TRS-80s. And
old trash.
And I was teaching them basic, but the first class, I couldn't even get them to touch the keyboard. They were afraid that they would do something wrong, it would break, it would make a mistake.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and I think that getting people to you have to try it. I mean, I tell people all the time, people who they're complaining about ChatGPT, and I said, "Did you ever try it?" "Oh no." Well, how could you talk about something that you've never actually experienced in a way that's critical? Try it. I always tell people, don't just put one prompt. If you haven't done 3 or 4 follow-up prompts, then you really haven't used GPT. Whether it's Bard or whether it's ChatGPT or whatever it is. If you haven't done a succession of prompts where you continue to refine or give more information or stuff like that, it's a question of just practicing. But while I got 3 really smart guys here, I want to flip it back to you and say, what skill do you see? We talked about a bunch of them. It's okay if you say any of them, but I'm just curious what each of you see as a critical skill for the next part of the 21st century.
Patience and empathy.
Knowing how to listen to the things that are said and the things that aren't said.
So that would be critical thinking. That would be critical thinking as well. So listening and critical thinking. Okay.
Yeah.
Patience and what was it? Patience and empathy.
Empathy. Yeah. Well, empathy can be done by machine, as doctors recently found out. The machine is better than the doctor. Sorry, in empathy and in diagnosis. So, So I think it's, as Marshall said, it's the listening with the intent of understanding. So,
I
which
think
is
the world
critical
would be a
thinking.
lot better place if
Which
more
is
people
critical
did that.
thinking then at
Yes,
the end.
sir.
Yeah.
Well,
But as said, so all sorts of other stuff can be emulated very easily. And well, as I always say, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and does whatever stuff like a duck, it might just be a duck. So do we know if we don't even see who's on the other side? So, but that leads me, as we are on top of the hour, actually we are past the top of the hour, that leads me to the famous last words, which we came to a habit ending this session. And as we didn't say much about CRM and CX in this CRM convo,
I mentioned it briefly.
Yeah, very, very briefly. So how do the 4 core skills that we now found out, search, vet, synthesize, and curate, what's their impact on CX, on the customer experience, or on a customer's experience?
That's a great. The challenge for the human on doing customer service is what I talked about before, which is if there's a problem that happened before, automation can handle it the next time because we already know the answer. So the challenge is understanding. It's what Marshall was talking about in terms of listening. It's listening, empathy, critical thinking, because I was in the IT service management business for many years. I was a pioneer in the MSP space, and we had an old adage that the problem is never where you think it is, and the customer or the end user is probably wrong. All right. So, and it wasn't saying that they were, they were not smart or they're not, but somebody calls up and says, my computer's not working. Well, okay. So what are you trying to do? Well, I can't get my email. Okay. So what are you trying to do? And it ends up that the mail server's down. Their computer's fine.
Okay.
Right. And that's an example of the problem isn't where they think it is. They just think because how they look at the world is I have my computer and there's my email. They don't understand mail servers and applications and all that kind of stuff. So being able to assess what the problem is before trying to just throw a solution at it is a critical skill from a CX point of view, from a customer service point of view,
and from a sales point of view, if you think about it.
100%. 100%. It's listening. If somebody says, we have old software, we want new software. You make all sorts of assumptions about what you think their problems are based on what you know about whatever competitor that they're using and how you think you can replace them and what's your competitive differentiation, blah, blah, blah. Let that go.
Yeah.
Why are you looking to do this? Well, and in any endeavor, there's always the 3 legs of the stool: people, processes, and tools. You can't just fix one of them to solve a problem. You usually have to look at all 3, and so Marshall, that's what when from a sales point of view, it's the problem isn't where they think it is either. They're just saying I'm frustrated, and that's where the listening and the empathy and asking good questions comes in to say, okay, well, can I help you? I don't know, but let's talk about what it is that what your challenge is, and maybe at the end of it we might have a way that we can move forward that I can help you, or maybe I can't, and we don't know that yet.
I'd call those good words.
What's that?
I'd call those some good famous last words. Nicely done. Although famous last words does have a certain connotation in English that maybe it doesn't have elsewhere, but you know what? We like calling them that. So there you go.
Thanks, Marshall.
Well, and it's only pertinent to the specific conversation. It shall not become too terminal.
Alan, it was marvelous. It was enjoyable. It was entertaining. Please come back soon. And thank you very, very much. I'm very grateful.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. It was fun. Fun conversation.
It was. Thanks a lot. Also to whoever is still in the audience, because we didn't manage to throw them all off and scare them away. So we are back next week. Another guest, same time. See you later.
Let's go back.
Take care.